thought is difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations. Good morning, students. Welcome back. I hope all of you are safe and fit at home, studying well and completing your work on time. This video is for the students of class 8, subject English. And today in this video, we are going to cover one chapter of our supplementary reader book, that is It So Happened. This is our chapter number 7 and the name of the chapter is The Open Window. This is lecture number 1 of the same chapter. This chapter is taken from It So Happened book. Students, we shall cover this chapter in 2 lectures because this chapter consists 3 parts. And in today's video, the topics to be covered are about the author, objectives, main key points, introduction of the chapter and detailed explanation of part 1 along with word meanings. Students, before start reading the chapter in detail, let me tell you about the author first. H. Munro's full name was Hector Hugh Munro. His pen name was Saki. He was born on 18th December 1870 in British Burma. He was famous author, playwright. His notable work is Alice in Westminster. He died on 14th November 1916 at the age of 45 in France. So this was all about the author. Now let us see what are the main objectives of this chapter. To understand the passage and grasp its meaning. Number 2 is to read with correct pronunciation, stress, intonation, pause and articulation of voice. Number 3 is to enable the students to understand the passage by silent reading. Number 4 is to enrich their active and passive vocabulary. Number 5 is this chapter teaches how people can be cruel at heart despite polite manners and sweetness. Number 6 is one must not reveal their vulnerabilities to those they don't know. So these were objectives. So first of all, let us see what are the main key points of the chapter. Once Frampton Nuttall visited Spelton family. Frampton Nuttall was suffering from nervousness. He goes to a calm and quiet place in the countryside for treatment. There he calls on a family friend. Nuttall's sister had told him that he would meet very few people in the countryside. The young girl Vera asked Nuttall if he knew many people there. He told her that he did not know anybody. Vera told Nuttall that a tragedy had happened in the family about 3 years ago. It opened onto a lawn. It was kept wide open even on an October afternoon. Nuttall asked the girl if that tragedy had something to do with the window. The aunt often told the girl how they went out. Sometimes Vera too had a feeling that they would walk through that window. So these were main key points of the chapter. So now let us see the introduction of the chapter. The Open Window by H. Munro tells us a story where a 15-year-old's lie was just about to be caught. Mrs. Spelton's niece, in order to entertain her guest Frampton Nuttall, made up a story about how her aunt's husband and Two brothers once went shooting through a window 3 years ago and never came back. This is the explanation she gives behind the open window on an unusually hot afternoon. The reality takes a turn when her aunt's husband and the two brothers can be seen returning through the window, which scares Mr. Nuttall away. To explain Mr. Nuttall's response, the 15-year-old once again makes up a story because, after all, romance at short notice was her specialty. So, this was the brief introduction of the chapter. Dear students, this story is divided into three parts. So, in today's video, I am going to explain the story of part 1 in detail along with word meanings. Frampton Nuttall has bad nerves. He retires to the country for cure and calls on a family friend. The lady, being busy upstairs, her young niece refers to a family mishap with focus on the open window. My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall said, a very self-possessed. Self-possessed means calm, confident, or sure of herself way. Young lady of 15. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me. Means the story begins with a conversation between Vera, a calm and confident lady of 15, and Mr. Nuttall. Mr. Nuttall had come to visit her aunt, and the young lady tells him that her aunt will see him shortly. She suggests that they must get to know each other till the time she comes. Frampton Nuttall endeavored. Endeavored means tried to say something which should duly flatter the needs of moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Here the meaning of flatter is make, but in this chapter it means happy. Duly means in accordance with what is required or appropriate. Unduly means overly. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits of a succession of total strangers would do much towards helping the nerve cure which he was supposed to be undergoing. Means, Frampton Nuttall tried thinking of something appropriate to say to the niece without disregarding her aunt, who was yet to arrive on scene. He had come to the countryside to cure his nerves, but in his opinion, visiting some strangers formally would not be of much help in curing his nerves. I know how it will be, his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. Retreat means a quiet or scheduled place in which one can rest or relax or and relaxed. You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. Moping means wander about listlessly and aimlessly because of unhappiness or boredom. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all the people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice. Means, when Mr. Nuttall was preparing to move to the country for his rural retreat, his sister knew how it would be for him. She knew he would isolate himself in the country and won't socialize with anyone. He would end up making his nerves worse by wandering about aimlessly because of unhappiness or boredom. Thus, she decided to give him a few letters of introduction for all the people she knew there. She said that as far as she could recall, people there were quite nice. Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Spelton, the lady to whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came into the nice division. Means Frampton Nuttall thought to himself that the lady he was visiting, the one he was supposed to present his sister's letter of introduction to, belonged to her sister's division of nice people. Do you know many of the people round here? Asked the niece when she judged that they had sufficient silence communion. Communion means communication. Hardly a soul, said Freddom. My sister was staying here some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here. Means suddenly, when the niece realized that it has been long since they spoke a word. So, to break the silence in the room, she asked Mr. Nuttall how many people he knew in the country. He replied that he hardly knew anyone and told her that his sister, who lived here around 4 years ago, had given him a few letters of introduction. He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. Distinct means recognizably different. Then you know practically nothing about my aunt, pursued the self possessed young lady. Pursued means continued. Only her name and address, admitted the caller. Means he said all of this in a unique regret which made the little self possessed lady conclude tone filled with and asked him if he meant he knew nothing about her aunt. Mr. Nuttall honestly replied that he only knew her aunt's name and address. He was wondering whether Mrs. Spelton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. Suggest masculine habitation means suggest that the room belonged to a man. Means he further thought to himself about the marital status of Mrs. Spelton. He wanted to know if she was married or widowed. Though there was something in the room that he couldn't figure out, gave him a sense that it belonged to a man. Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago, said the child. That would be since your sister's time. Her tragedy? Tragedy means an event causing great suffering, destruction, and distress. Asked Frampton. Somehow, in this restful country spot, tragedies seemed out of place. Out of place means unsuitable. Means the niece spoke about some mishap that took place nearly about 3 years ago, which she mentioned must be around Mr. Nuttall's sister's time in the country. Mr. Nuttall enquired about the tragedy she was talking about, although to him it seemed as if it was almost impossible for tragedies to happen in such a peaceful country site. You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon, said the niece. indicating a large French window that opened on to a lawn. It is quite warm for the time of the year, said Frampton. But has that window got anything to do with the tragedy? Means she showed him a large French window that was opened on to a lawn and asked him if he was wondering why it was kept open on an October afternoon. Frampton did agree that it was quite unusual to keep a window open when it was quite hot outside. He further asked her if the open window was somehow related to the tragedy. Out through that window 3 years ago to a day, her husband and her two young brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. Means the niece begins telling about the tragedy that happened 3 years ago on the exact same day when her aunt's husband and two young brothers went for the day's shooting out through that very window. She tells him that they never returned back. In crossing the moor or moor to their favorite shooting ground. Moor means grassland. They were all three engulfed. Engulfed means swept over, buried in a treacherous piece of bog. Treacherous means dangerous, though it seems safe. Bog means wet or spongy ground. It had been that dreadful wet summer. Dreadful means extremely bad. And places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the dreadful part of it. Means what happened was when they were crossing the grassland to go to their favorite shooting spot, they got trapped in a safe looking but actually dangerous bog. They got completely buried in it. She related how that summer was extremely wet and the places that posed no harm earlier suddenly became unsafe. Unfortunately, their bodies could never be found. She mentions that this part of the story was most terrible. Here, the child's voice lost its self possessed note and became falteringly. Falteringly means a faltering voice is shaky, hesitant. Human. Poor aunt always thinks that they will come back someday. They and the little brown spaniel. Spaniel means a dog of a breed with a long silky coat and dropping ears that was lost with them and walk in at that window just as they used to do. Means after she recited this part of the story, the tone of her voice changed drastically from self possessed to a hesitant human. She further told Mr. Nuttall that her poor aunt awaits their return till date. She thinks that the three of them and the brown spaniel means dog that went with them would just come walking in from that window like they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Dusk means sunset. Poor dear aunt, she has often told me how they went out, her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing Bertie, why do you bond? As he always did to tease her, because she said it got on her nerves. Means this perhaps was the reason behind her keeping the window open for every single day till sunset. She tells him how her dear aunt often tells her how they left her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing Bertie, why do you bond? Because she didn't like the song and he liked teasing her. Do you know sometimes on still quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they will all walk in through that window. Means she even shares with Mr. Nuttall how on a few silent evenings she gets a strange feeling that all of them would come walking in through that window. So, this was the story of part 1. I hope all of you have understood. Students, you have to complete your homework on the basis of the chapter explained by me. And your homework is read chapter 7, that is the open window, and write word meanings mentioned in the video. Based on the understanding of the chapter, write the answers of the questions mentioned in the book It So Happened As. Page number 57, comprehension check, question number 1 to 3. Students, you have to complete these question answers in your English Fair notebook by following the correct format. Students, you have to write the meanings of the following words in your English Fair notebook. Number 1 is endeavored. Number 2 is dusk. Number 3 is vogue. Number 4 is pursued. Number 5 is treacherous. Now let us see the questions of comprehension check, which is on page number 57. Question number 1 is, why had Frampton Nuttall come to the rural retreat? Question number 2 is, why had his sister given him letters of introduction to people living there? Question number 3 is, what had happened in the Spelton family as narrated by the niece? So, these are the questions which you have to do in your English Fair notebook. So, that's all for today. This is the end of the lecture. Students, if you like our videos, please hit on the like button and don't forget to subscribe our channel. Thank you and have a nice day.